In the unforgiving land of the Wild West, where dust ruled the air and mercy was rarer than rain, lived a poor rancher named Elias Turner. His ranch sat alone on the edge of a dry valley, miles away from the nearest town, surrounded by broken fences, stubborn land, and silence that spoke louder than words. Elias was not rich, not powerful, and certainly not important in the eyes of the world. He owned 2 thin horses, a creaking wooden cabin, and a heart that refused to harden despite years of loss. His wife had died of fever, his crops barely survived each season, and debt followed him like a shadow. Yet every morning Elias woke before dawn, whispered a prayer, and worked the land as if hope itself depended on him. Folks in town said kindness would get a man killed out here, especially with Apache territory stretching beyond the hills. But Elias believed kindness was the only thing the West hadn't stolen from him yet. One cold evening, as the sun bled orange across the sky, Elias heard a sound that didn't belong to the wind, a faint groan. He grabbed his old rifle and stepped outside, heart pounding. Near the dry creek bed lay a man barely alive, his body covered in dust and blood. He wasn't a settler. He was Apache. Years of fear and stories rushed into Elias's mind. Raids, scalping, death. But when he looked closer, he didn't see an enemy. He saw a young man wounded badly, his breathing shallow, his eyes full of pain and fear. Elias stood there frozen. Helping this man could mean death. Leaving him would mean murder. After a long silence, Elias lowered his rifle. "No one dies on my land," he whispered. Dragging the wounded Apache into his cabin took all his strength. Elias cleaned the wounds, used the last of his supplies, tore his own shirt for bandages, and stayed awake all night feeding the fire and whispering prayers. The Apache never spoke, only watched with guarded eyes. When morning came, Elias offered water and food. Slowly the man drank. Days passed. The Apache healed, strength returning bit by bit. Elias learned his name was Nantan, though words were few. They spoke mostly with silence and shared glances. One night before leaving, Nantan stood at the cabin door. He placed his hand over his heart, then pointed to Elias. It was not a thank you spoken aloud, but it carried more weight than words. Then he disappeared into the hills. Weeks passed. Life returned to its usual struggle. Elias repaired fences, fought the land, ignored the whispers of danger. But deep inside, he felt something had changed, like the earth itself was holding its breath. One night, strange dreams haunted him, hooves pounding, faces in the dark, eyes watching from the hills. He woke before dawn to a sound that shook his bones, horses, hundreds of them. The ground trembled like thunder rolling straight toward his ranch. Fear wrapped around Elias's chest. He stepped onto the porch, heart racing, hands empty, and then he saw them. From the hills, pouring into the valley like a living tide, came Apache warriors, rows upon rows, stretching farther than his eyes could see. Painted faces, spears, rifles, war cries echoing against the sky. 1,000 Apaches had come to his ranch at dawn. Elias knew this was the end. He stood tall anyway. Running would change nothing. Hiding would bring shame. He waited. The riders stopped just short of his cabin. Silence fell heavy. At the front rode a familiar face, Nantan. Nantan dismounted and approached slowly. He spoke loudly in his language, his voice carrying power and command. Other warriors watched, hands tense on their weapons. Then Nantan turned to Elias. In broken English, he spoke words that would change everything. "You saved one life. Apache never forget." The warriors began to dismount, not in attack but in respect. They placed their weapons on the ground. Elias felt his knees weaken. He had not invited death. He had invited destiny. As the morning sun rose higher, the truth unfolded like a legend written by fate itself. Nantan was not an ordinary Apache. He was the son of a great chief. The man Elias had saved was believed dead, left behind after a brutal skirmish with rival tribes. When Nantan returned alive, carried by his people's belief in miracles, the story spread like wildfire through the Apache nation. They asked him who had saved him. He spoke of a poor rancher who showed mercy when mercy meant risking everything. In Apache tradition, such a debt could not be repaid with gold or words. It could only be repaid with honor. The warriors came not to take but to give protection. Nantan declared that Elias's land was now under Apache protection. Any man who harmed him would face the full wrath of 1,000 warriors. From that day on, raiders avoided the valley. Outlaws turned away. Even the harsh land seemed to soften. The Apaches helped Elias rebuild fences, dig wells, and guide water through the soil. Crops grew stronger. Horses multiplied. Trade routes shifted. The poor rancher was poor no more, but he remained humble. Word spread across the West. Some called it a myth. Others called it madness. But no one dared test it. Soldiers rode past without stopping. Bandits whispered warnings. Children grew up hearing the story of the rancher who treated an enemy like a brother. Elias often sat on his porch at sunset, watching Apache children laugh near his fields. Realizing that kindness had given him a family larger than blood, he never asked for protection. He never demanded loyalty. He had simply done what was right when it was hardest. Years later, when Elias passed away peacefully in his sleep, the dawn looked different. Apache warriors arrived silently, hundreds of them standing guard around his ranch. They buried him with honor, not as a settler, not as a stranger, but as one of their own. No guns fired, no cries raised. Only the wind whispered across the land he once protected with nothing but compassion. And so, the Wild West learned a lesson it never expected, that kindness can summon an army, that mercy can be stronger than fear, and that even the poorest man can change history with one brave choice. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now for more emotional, thrilling, and unforgettable stories from history and imagination. Your support turns these tales into legends,